All right. Hi, everyone. So we're going to do this one in English. I normally do videos in Polish, but I'm going to be commenting on a prominent video in English directed at the American audience. So we're going to do that in English. So I'm going to be reacting to Dr. Mike versus 20 Anti-Vaxxers on the Surrounded show for the channel Jubilee. That has come out 3 weeks ago or so. Dr. Mike is a prominent YouTuber and family medicine practitioner in the United States. He has a huge channel and he's doing really great work on communicating publicly about healthcare and dispelling myths. His podcast, The Checkup, is really worth checking out. So he's hugely popular and he's doing really good work tackling misinformation, conspiracies, misunderstandings about public health, about family medicine, about health gurus, YouTube fads that grow out of minuscule studies that then get picked up by podcast bros or perpetuated irresponsibly by influencers. He has had tons of them on his podcast. So here he's decided to confront 20 anti-vaxxers. On a separate video, he said that the people who came in to talk to him, they didn't know who they were going to talk to. And he didn't know what kind of people are going to be there. In just a second, we're going to see how well of a job he's done. We're going to pick apart the things that people are saying and try to understand what is going on. Who am I? Well, on top of being nobody, I'm a physicist. I hold a PhD in physics. I'm a software engineer. I'm doing a master's in cognitive science, and my thesis is on conspiracy theories and conspiracy thinking. I've managed to develop a strong background in the science on conspiracy thinking and conspiracy belief. So that makes me at least sort of qualified to speak out on that topic and to comment on what is happening. I hope you'll find this useful, and let's get going.
Cost lives. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Doing fantastic. Excited to talk about health.
I just had a baby, 7 months old. And, my baby, I was like, no, I'm not getting any vaccines. The doctors came in, they made me feel like a very bad mother for not doing that, right? I was very pressured. And then...
Okay, first off, this is unfortunately really common that people get judged when they have a baby, that they get judged for being concerned about vaccines, and they're being told that not giving your child a vaccine makes you a bad parent. And I think that's the wrong approach. I know that healthcare providers can feel like this matter is so complex and that it will require too much time for us to generate the understanding that is required on behalf of parents so that they understand why vaccines are needed, was the actual trade-off that we're talking about here. So in effect, they resort to this kind of communication that essentially boils down to a veiled threat or judgment so that parents just submit out of shame or out of guilt or out of legitimate concern for the baby's health. However, if we do that, and I'm not a healthcare professional, but just in general, just as a broad approach to communication, leveraging concern and leveraging shame, that is precisely the same machinery that gets activated when people decline vaccinations. Maybe shame to a lesser extent, although that there is an emerging thing like a normative skepticism towards science. So you might be shunned by your own community if it has gone that far that it is a normative requirement for you to be anti-science and anti-vaccines. That is something that you might be concerned about. However, the concern for the newborn is the thing that vaccine skeptics leverage, as well as those doctors that tell people that not doing that will bring about harm to your baby. In general, the imperative for vaccination changes over a spectrum, and that spectrum is correlated or determined by how rampant is the disease. if this is a new thing or we haven't gotten it under control, the vaccine is actually a direct benefit to your child. However, if we have things like the MMR vaccine, whereas at the time when this was less of an issue that people were declining vaccination, vaccine rates were really high. The concern is about public health. And that is what he is going to be saying next, I think. And that is why the argument from personal choice, it does not hold, actually, because we're trying to keep the disease at bay and we vaccinate those babies for a number of reasons. They're in a hospital, and the hospital is and then they need to be in the hospital for at least a couple of days. The hospital is an environment that's just full of all kinds of pathogens, and then they go to daycare or people come over. So your child is going to have lots of interactions over the first couple of years. So there is always a component of protection against direct threat. However, in a situation in which we have high vaccine rates, around 98%, then what happens? We are vaccinating those babies that we judge are healthy enough to get the vaccine for two reasons. One is that we keep the disease at bay from the general society, and for the benefit of those kids that are for other reasons compromised and shouldn't take the vaccine because it's actually against their best interest in terms of health for some reasons. And what we should be communicating is that vaccinating your child is not for the benefit of your child. And that is only fair to say that explicitly. And a lot of people will react to this, I don't care. I only care about my child. To which, what can we say? Fair enough. That's still your obligation. And if you decline, you'll have to bear the consequences of making that choice. But at least you're making the choice consciously. And you know the reasons why you're making this choice. And we know the reasons. And second, I think when people would really ask themselves, I don't believe most people actually do not care about others. That's something that they could say out of their direct emotional response. It is a stressful situation when you're with a newborn. The machinery that makes you care for your newborn more than anything else is hyperactivated. And that's quite understandable why you would say that you don't actually care about other children, because maybe you don't. And you can still make that choice. You can feel subjectively that you do not care about anything else, but you can still make the choice because you believe that society exists and it has benefit for you and for everyone else to have a healthy society around you. But in general, when things wind down, when you're not as emotionally activated and defensive, I don't believe that you actually do not care about anyone else. I wouldn't say that most people, even if they say so, that they do not care about anything else. I think that's a defense when people say that, because they see the vaccine, they see the inoculation as a threat. And an inoculation with a needle, that is something very concrete that you have to witness and agree to. And I believe there's a huge cognitive dissonance that you have to push through to suppress the instinct that this is harming your child, that somebody puncturing the skin of your child with a needle is actually not doing any harm. It's very hard to make yourself believe that. But we have knowledge and we can make the choice despite of feeling that way. We can still make the choice. But we have to understand this is distressing. It's normal to feel that, to be concerned. It's normal to even find yourself so concerned by the idea of inoculating the child that you can feel absolutely sure that this is bad for your child. And that's normal, but you gotta, in a sense, push through that. And this is something we're going to be coming back to in this discussion, because what people are doing, they're losing that ability to critically look back at what feels obvious to them, and they're coming back to trusting their gut. And we see this everywhere. The decline of trust in science looks exactly like that. We are going back to just trusting our gut. And there's reasons why we lose trust in those higher cognitive abilities in the institutions that we should suspend trusting our gut and we should do what they say instead. But let's continue.
I had a family friend who had a baby at the same time, was a few months in, gave vaccines to the baby, and the baby had seizures and has had seizures since. And I've also had a friend who I went on a mission trip with, and this pastor was totally healthy, two young girls, and this pastor literally got a heart attack out of nowhere. And the only thing was he took the vaccine. And there's many cases like that.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the birth of a 7-month-old. The fact that anyone made you feel bad in the healthcare system, I feel like is a failure on us in the healthcare system, so I'm sorry that happened to you. In healthcare, it's very difficult to predict the future because there are so many unknowns and there's so many variables in healthcare. There are things that are a lot that are outside of our control. And we try to do the best with the limited amounts that we can control. So when we see two things happen simultaneously in healthcare, sometimes we think they have caused one another. But unless we see it.
Yeah, correlation versus causation, that's a tale as old as time. It doesn't work very well on people. And it's good that he's addressed the emotional experience of this person. So she's had a bad experience. She felt judged. And I think what is going to do more work in this case is him acknowledging that. I think that she felt validated, and that is going to go a longer way than him explaining that correlation isn't causation. However, that's still valuable. Maybe because he's validated her first, that is going to work better than normally.
A pattern of that happening over and over again on a large scale,
Right.
It's more likely that this is just a coincidence of things happening at the same time. For example, I have a friend of mine who's a physician who vaccinates children very regularly. And they were about to give a child the vaccine. And before giving the vaccine, the child had a seizure. They went on and had more seizures throughout their life and ended up actually dying at a very young age because of a seizure disorder. The vaccine was never given. Had that happened 2 minutes later, what do you think would have been in the mother's mind and in the father's mind in that situation, other than, I definitely think that vaccine caused that problem. But it could have just as easily happened before, which it did, and the vaccine wasn't responsible. So it's very difficult when two things happen at the same time to be able to make an exact reason as to if that's what happened to cause it. So what we do is we admit that there's safety issues with vaccines.
Right.
They're not 100% safe. Nothing in life is 100% safe.
That is so important. That is so important. Nobody can guarantee that any kind of treatment, although one could argue that we should stop calling vaccines treatment, but that's a very hard problem to tackle. But it's so important that we stop telling people that things are going to be fine. It's harmless. Because if we keep doing that, people are going to continue coming out of the woodwork and showing cases in which people have died following a vaccine. Or that could have been a coincidence, but it could have also been directly caused by the vaccine. That's not something that doesn't happen. We need to focus on numbers. So this lady has brought up examples, confirmatory examples. There are tons of evolutionary mechanisms that help us deal with highly unusual situations, like the representativeness heuristic, availability heuristic, recency bias, or the big cause, big effect heuristics. So this lady brings up examples of things happening following a vaccination. It doesn't mean that the vaccine didn't have any role, but we need to focus on. So these are individual examples. And those individual examples, we can't actually say anything unless we do an autopsy or even it might be impossible to tell whether the vaccine had any play in what happened to those people. However, it is not an actual argument to bring up these kinds of examples, because to judge the efficacy of vaccines, you need to go to the level of a population. You need to have stats. You need to have actual numbers. And we're, as humans, really, really bad at estimating those numbers based on those select examples because of those cognitive heuristics. We tend to assign a much higher likelihood of bad things happening over and over if we're able to link a very unusual, cognitively speaking, unusual cause, alleged cause, to a shocking outcome, like when someone gets inoculated with a vaccine. Inoculation is not intuitive. It's not intuitive that getting punctured with a needle is going to help anything. And the human mind, when it links those two together, it will tell you, it will tell the subject, yeah, that's very likely to happen again. And every other cause of death associated with the vaccine, that's probably why this person died, if they had been vaccinated. So we have this faculty that has worked for us hundreds of thousands of years ago, that if one thing happens, somebody dies, somebody has a seizure, somebody projectile vomits, and then dies horribly, convulsing, that there is something going on. There is something bad around us, that we should look back on everything that could have caused this, that we should check what has this person had for dinner? Were they bitten by a snake? Or maybe some of our food is spoiled or whatnot. But nowadays, we see so many people. It's highly unusual for the human brain. It's highly counterintuitive for the human brain to be dealing with living in a society of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And the way that diseases spread in this environment is completely different. And what has worked is a cognitive shortcut for judging the probability of something bad happening again, or associating the outcome with a probable cause that's way out of whack in this environment. And vaccines are highly counterintuitive. We might know intellectually that they do work, but imagine this: an inoculation is very much like a bite from an insect. And bites from insects can be deadly, and they were. So it's no wonder that we associate this with a distressing outcome. And that needs to be acknowledged, but it also has to be acknowledged that this isn't an actual argument. This is something that is distressing. This is something that needs attention. This is something that has caused this person emotional anguish, that somebody in their family died, or someone in their environment has died from this, from a heart attack. And if something like this happens close to you socially, in terms of social connection, that is also an indicator, a cognitive indicator, that there is some threat looming or spreading in your general vicinity, and you should be on high alert. It's no wonder, but we need to acknowledge this, and he is acknowledging some of it. I'm not sure if this person is convinced. Format of this debate is not probably going to allow for explication on their part or asking more questions, but let's see.
Driving or walking here today is not 100% safe. I could have a heart attack right now. Cannot predict it. But what we can do is try to do the best that we can with the information that we have.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Dr. Mike.
That was smooth. Hello.
He's got that wrist flowing. I'm actually a fan of your channel. I've been watching for a while.
Thank you.
I am a pediatric hematology oncology nurse.
Wow, okay.
I think a lot of mistrust, and my eyes were opened during the whole COVID pandemic.
Why?
Institutions that were there. I used to be in the military, so when I was in the military, I signed my bodily autonomy away. If they told me to do something, I did it.
And thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks.
No, I say that in all seriousness, because I think a lot of times that kind of becomes habit just to say thank you, but I really do mean that thank you.
I appreciate that. So seeing, how Dr. Fauci, who was just, and that's a whole other American tax dollars paid for, while these pharmaceutical companies reaped millions and millions of profits on, And I think that caused the goalpost, the vaccine, this mRNA vaccine, it's going to prevent the transmission of COVID, it's going to prevent you from getting it, and others, if you don't get this vaccine, you hate your grandmother, you're going to kill all these people, and you got to do your duty and get it. Well, you know what? My grandmother got it, and she died. I saw her take her last breath.
I'm sorry.
And it's a very...
So the last person was in a precarious position because they had a baby, and this person has suffered a direct loss. So this is something that we'll be seeing a lot of. So a lot of people with a personal stake in this and showing up, or with a baggage of concerns that have been validated by their personal situation or their experiences. Now, how do you deal with that? How do you respond to something like that? That the system has been telling us that the vaccine is going to stop the spread, or that the vaccine is going to prevent illness, and then somebody gets vaccinated and then they die. Let's see.
It's a very profound thing to see someone that you love take their last breath and go on to whatever happens after.
Of course.
So when those seats, and it turns out the 6 feet of social distancing was not based on anything, how can you not expect people to question these higher institutions that are deemed to look out for the well-being of people, and they don't?
It's a great question.
So just like with Black people who don't trust the government because based on the Tuskegee experiment in 1932, 40 years after that, the New York Times, they actually infected them with syphilis, and they let them infect their families, their friends. It ran rampant. So how do you expect certain people, when they've been burned by the government, to all of a sudden, all right, well, I'll trust you now? Ultimately, it's people's choice. Just like if
we'll go back to it's people's choice, but the government needs to own up to making mistakes. So I don't have a first-hand experience of how it was like in the US, but we've had this in Poland as well. My understanding of this is that the government was in full panic mode, and the absolute roller coaster of absolutely flip-flop decisions on whether masks are necessary, whether distancing is required or not, whether you can go into a park or not, that was out of pure panic. And in a state of panic, if you insist that you're in absolute control, that just wipes away all of your credibility, because people can see that you're panicking. And it's not a solved problem. What to do in a state of general emergency in order to keep the damage to a minimum. And on one hand, it's natural that they ping pong between policies because things change day by day. They don't have complete information, but they need to get people in line with the policy that, to our best understanding and based on, I wouldn't say it's random, but in situations like this, you deal with very limited information, but you still need to make a decision. You can't afford not making a decision. You can't just let it go. If you have those data from China, from Italy, and it's not clear what is happening and what you can do as an agent of a government office who has now to tell people what they should or shouldn't be doing. Maybe it's not advisable to, in a state of general emergency, say that we don't know what's happening. We have no idea why we're imposing these kinds of restrictions. Maybe that's not a great idea, because are people just going to do what you tell them based on that? I don't think so. I'm not sure. But when you're done with that, you need to do a fully transparent post-mortem and own up to your decisions. And in general, when reviewing past decisions, do that review minding the state of knowledge at the time of having made that decision. So some of that is going to require admitting that those decisions were arbitrary. They were largely arbitrary. We had no sufficient reason to be sure that this decision was better than not making this decision. But we did make it because in this position, we had to make a judgment call. don't defend the decision. Don't say, we knew and it was effective. Admit it, you didn't know. Nobody knew what was happening, yet you still had the public's interest as your main responsibility, and you had to make a judgment call. And that's what you did, and that is what you should be owning up to. And in general, we should try to develop an general understanding of, and it's also an evolutionary heuristic that is called the hindsight bias, is that we tend to judge past decisions, both ours and others, based on the knowledge we have now. And we find it really hard to go back and imagine we don't know the things we do now had we been making that decision in the past. It's very hard to do, but an understanding that is very hard to do, we need to do it. And that is only fair towards the people who were in charge of making those decisions. If they own up to it, and if they don't go on defending decisions that turned out to be unfortunate, wrong, or not helpful.
Rampant. So how do you expect certain people, when they've been burned by the government, to all of a sudden, all right, well, I'll trust you now? Ultimately, it's people's choice. Just like if someone wants to refuse a treatment, we give them an AMA form against.
Vaccines aren't treatment. I mean, if you're at risk of contracting whatever disease that is likely to harm you, yes, they are treatment, like the HPV vaccine for women. But vaccinations, general vaccinations, are a public health device. They're not treatment. Vaccines are like turn signals in your car. It's not your choice to have turn signals in your car or not.
It's medical advice. I think it's all up to people's choice and their autonomy.
There's a few topics that you touched that I think are really worth discussing. First, bodily autonomy. I believe that, and that is the sole principle by which we practice medicine. Vaccines fall in a unique category because your decision on vaccinating your child and then sending them to school can impact other children in that school. So much like drinking and driving as an example, your choice to do that puts your life at risk, but it also puts others at risk. So we deem that as dangerous for the general public. This is why vaccines, it becomes a little more complicated when we.
This guy's shaking his head. I'm curious what he has to say about that.
Talk about bodily autonomy. When it comes to our government, our mandates, pharmaceutical companies, there's absolutely reasons for distrust. I love that everyone in this room is a skeptic, and I encourage skepticism. I don't think anyone should just go.
Validation. That's a great job. A lot of people are very allergic towards validating anything about scientific skepticism or anti-vaxxers. But we got to understand that in many cases, the motivation for believing in conspiracy theories is emotional, and it comes down to perceived threat, real or not. Not always, but in a lot of cases. And the first step to regulating someone's emotions is acknowledgement. And maybe then they will listen. So he's doing a really great job validating that upfront. And I think this is also part of his training and also why he's so successful. Unfortunately, I don't think that's as widespread or normal as he's saying in his other videos, that doctors are trained in this empathetic interviewing and reflection techniques or whatnot. And it's certainly not the case in what I've seen based on my interactions with some of the doctors in Poland. They absolutely judge people a lot of the time. They make inappropriate comments and inappropriate jokes. They interrupt, judge, and yell. So I would like that most doctors be like Dr. Mike. If he's like this in his practice, then that's really great. I would like to see more of that, please. Yes.
Go into a doctor's office and say yes, 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 yes. In fact, I love when my patients question me. I empower them to ask questions. Doctors sometimes get this attitude where they're like, oh, you Googled before coming here? Google search doesn't replace my degree. No, that's not how we're supposed to be. What I get excited about is if you Googled and you have questions, now I know exactly the route I need to take to help you make a decision that's right for you and your family.
Okay, pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return
Thank
to your
seat. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Nice meeting you.
I'm wondering what that means, that people are voting someone out. Is it because they're not challenging him enough, or I don't know? It seems like anti-vaxxers scoring each other on how much anti-vax you are.
How you doing?
Pleasure to meet you.
Yes, Roots God. Good to meet you as well.
Love the jacket.
Thank you so much. So I really want to talk to you about this claim based on all of the other things that are causing disease, the chronic conditions that are in this country, all of the metabolic issues, and this is stemming from colonization. Putting smallpox blankets on indigenous cultures, sterilizing people in Puerto Rico, Honduras, all of these different things that have happened. And if you look at Africa, oh, by the way, Bill Gates did say something interesting. The next war will be fought with biological warfare. And I think that was raising eyebrows, especially when you look at the Kissinger report, right? For those of you who don't know about the Kissinger report, it's all about pretty much reducing the population of the planet. So I don't know how you can make this claim and really defend vaccines in the nature, in the world that we're living in, where we are actually going away from nature. And the further we get away from nature, the more diseases we will see. So, I'm very passionate about this, and I want to be able to have like a real discussion with you because yes, you're a medical doctor, but this is also a system that J.D. Rockefeller started, getting rid of all types of indigenous practices, and this land is stolen land. So when we're not even honoring the source, when we're not honoring the land, the ancestors, ancestral intelligence, the real AI, when we're not even honoring these things and we're just supposed to trust science. No, I trust my scientists. I trust Dr. Sebi, I trust Dr. Aris Atham, I trust Dr. Yaqui. Because this system is not for us. It's not built for people like me. It's not built for any of us. Because even the opioid crisis, we saw a lot of Caucasians suffering from that. So how can you sit here and say that this vaccine is killing people when this system is currently killing people? When we even have to have an administration that comes in now and says, oh, we got to start looking at all of these different toxins in the food, in the medicine, in the soil. I don't think it's fair for us to take this vaccine when we're already being forced to take polluted food.
Would you say...
Okay, before I let Dr. Mike speak, this may sound like a load of gibberish, and frankly, still to me, it does sound like a load of gibberish. However, there's a couple of through lines here. And first of all, there's a theme, and it's not just this person. These are themes that are very widespread. And we can also see that the conspiracy mentality crowd is not uniform. So this through line is about nature, connection with nature, and connection with one's true self. That's what this person means by saying that the system isn't built for him or for people like him. There is a lack of felt connection to the system. They don't have anything to latch onto. They don't feel that the system provides them with anything of relevance. We need to be very careful. I think what we just heard indicates that we cannot engage with this person deductively because this person is all over the place. You can see that they have made lots and lots of very loose associations between things that are perhaps very loosely related, but they have made that connections with their brain. That's primarily the job of the right hemisphere, very loose associations. And it makes sense to them. For them, this is a very compelling argument. And for a lot of people, this unloading of felt, perceived patterns, perceived associations is a valid argument. And you can't engage deductively with that argument. What I'm hoping Dr. Mike will do is engage with the concern, that he can read through that and he will engage with the concern, not with the argument, because the argument is not deductive in nature. It also isn't purely emotional. This is I wouldn't say, you could call it a strategy, but it's not something that this person is probably doing deliberately or even consciously, but they are looking for other people who also see patterns that they do. And this is why this unloading sounds so out there. So there's this through line of connection with nature, connection with one's identity, one's ancestry, and to some extent with one's true self, and that the system doesn't make them feel relevant. It doesn't make them feel like they belong, or that the system is catering for all of their needs in order to feel like they're being cared for by the system. What I understand about this is that this person interacts with the system, with the healthcare system, whatever it is like in the US, and it may even physiologically address their health concerns or help them recover from an illness. But it's not enough for a lot of people to receive treatment, to receive medication. Their expectation of what happens when you're being healed, of the experience of being taken care of or being healed, of recovering, has to be embedded in a feeling of deep engagement with the world, with the reality that they can sense directly. That is a very complex issue. There's this concept in cognitive science, in an activist and embedded cognitive science, of an affordance landscape, and deep connection with your environment comes from the richness of the means in which you can come into interaction with your environment, and your being in the environment is co-created by yourself and the environment at the same time. And they have a very deep need for that, and they're not getting that from the healthcare system, and we would be doing them a great disservice. And we're not going to get to a lot of people like that who need the sense of deep embedding with nature and with their environment that they can feel proximally with their own body. To some extent, this is also the continuation of this retreat back to subjective experience and the return of the primacy of subjective experience and the growing rejection of this top-down scientific policy-driven action planning that calls us to suspend the trust in subjective experience. There is some of that here, I think. But on the other hand, healing and medical practices have always been embedded in a cultural tradition. It wasn't very good medicine. What Dr. Mike is representing here is actual evidence-based medicine. However, we need to acknowledge that some people in all societies, in Poland as well, a lot of people find natural remedies, find things that are within their affordable reach to be far more convincing than what the cold, systematic, anonymizing, statistical healthcare system is doing for them, or what it can't do for them, and what it's not doing for them. So we need to acknowledge this, and I hope he's going to address the concern, not the argument, because to dismantle this person's way of thinking would be to question their faculties and their ability to reason, and that is not going to end well. They're going to feel rejected again, and I hope Dr. Mike's going to do a good job here.
Take this vaccine. Which vaccine are you talking about?
Well, really all of them. It should be a choice, because even when I was younger, I didn't take as many vaccines as the children have to take now. These children are sicker, they're going through more metabolic issues, they're having mental health issues, and now I don't think it's just the vaccine, it's the system that's perpetuating this type of lifestyle. Yes, that child who was even in the hospital under those fluorescent lights, I'm not surprised that they had a seizure before, because this is an environment that is not conducive to life. This thing that I'm wearing on my chest is called an ankh. Y'all replace this. Y'all replaced our cultures. This life representing thing, you replace it with death culture. This is not a healthcare system. It's a sick care system. And honestly, I cannot sit here in good faith and not represent all of the people who have come before me.
Yeah, absolutely. I respect that. I came to the United States as an immigrant living on welfare. So I got put into this same system that you're describing. It's
fucking beautiful. Yeah, I'm like you. I understand he's not addressing the argument. Although that might be tempting as hell. This guy's a saint. I know he's been making fun of it, that people have been calling him a saint, but I mean, this is just great, stellar work from Dr. Mike here. Fucking beautiful.
a shady system. the world is changing in ways that make our lives more unhealthy. We're eating more processed food, we're exposed to more chemicals, usually as a result of products that we actually enjoy. So when I complimented you on that great jacket, when someone wears a specific pretty strap on their Apple Watch, there's chemicals in there, there's forever chemicals in there. So for every amazing thing that we have in society, there's been drawbacks. The good part about our society is that we're constantly monitoring those drawbacks and are trying to create solutions for our own problems. So when I think about our current healthcare system, where I think it needs to do better is
So he has acknowledged that part of the sentiment that he in some way agrees with, or that he can at least relate to, without directly validating the direct anti-science sentiments that this person was expressing. Great stuff.
it needs to focus more on prevention rather than cures. Agree or disagree?
1,000%, yes, sir.
Do you know how we can do that?
Not through the vaccines, but one way we could do that is connecting more to nature. One way we could do that is making sure that we're not poisoning the food. One way we could do that is treating each other better with more respect.
And that moment of humor was just perfect. That's how you can connect with a person who has this deep kind of concern, and maybe then they'll listen or at least consider something that you might have to say. So really, really good.
Respect and actually getting rid of these systems that are putting us against us, this divide and conquer, the media manipulation and all of this fear tactics that was pushed during this vaccine COVID mumbo jumbo. Yeah. This was totally.
Do you think we should do all of it?
Okay, sorry, pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please
Thank you.
return to your seat.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi,
Hello.
Doctor.
Pleasure to meet you, sir.
How are you? Pleasure to meet you. So I'll let you know I'm Tom. I'm a police lieutenant from northern New Jersey.
Okay.
And what struck
Local.
me about your statement about body autonomy and children and the COVID vaccination. What would you say if I told you I had 3 daughters and my spouse and I had differing opinions on whether our children should be vaccinated with the COVID vaccine? And a judge orders that that vaccine be injected into my daughters. I'll give you a little bit of data first.
Before we go further, listen to this man's emphasis on the process, on the physiological process of injecting a vaccine into his daughters. He is processing this as a trespassing of not only bodily autonomy, but the bodily boundary. So there is stuff going inside my child, and that is powerful. So this goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. This will cause resistance. This is not to be dismissed lightly. We shouldn't just say, well, you're stupid for thinking that. Of course, you're troubled by this. Of course, this is not at face value an okay thing to do, to inject a child with a substance, because we have very strong intuitions about avoiding putting things into our body that cross this boundary. So, and this is why in some cases oral vaccines are actually more advisable, even though they aren't as effective, because the hydrochloric acid in your stomach disintegrates some of the agents, and in general absorption through your gut is not as good as directly into your bloodstream. However, this way we can avoid this kind of cognitive resistance to the idea of piercing the boundary of our bodies to put stuff in that shouldn't be there. And I'll look into some research on how ingrained and how available images of abstract toxic stuff that's not us should not be going into our bodies. How's that based in evolution, and how's that something that can get very active, and that the healthcare system demands that we suppress? Because I think that's what's happening here, and we resonate with that because he's expressing deep care about his daughters, right? And therefore, we interpret this as an argument. But that's not an argument. It's an expression of concern, and that should be acknowledged, but it's not an argument.
And this was part of my reasoning with the courts. Risk versus benefit, correct? From 2018 to 2023, if we trust the CDC, their numbers say the most deadly thing for our children, the number one deadly thing, do you happen to know what it is?
Guns.
Accidents. Not necessarily guns, but accidents. Do you know what the number two? And I'm going from children from 10 to 14 during the height of the pandemic.
Well, a little bit before the pandemic as well.
A little bit before, so the numbers are a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. The number two cause, suicide. Do you know where COVID is on that range of dangers?
Very low.
Very low. That population is about 21 million children in the United States. Between 2018 and 2023, there were about 4,000 to 7,000 accidents, about 1,000 suicides. Do you know how many deaths there were from COVID?
No, not offhand.
69. In New Jersey, where I'm from, the height of the pandemic, do you know how many deaths there were? 0. Now, are you familiar with the VAERS database?
Yes.
So that's for adverse reactions to vaccinations.
Yes.
During that time frame, this is about 6 months.
Why are these people nodding? Well, they may think that this person is making a good argument, but I would say that they're nodding because he is expressing a concern that they share. That's all there is. And he started with a concern, and then he seamlessly transitioned into something that he thinks is an argument. That's motivated reasoning. This database is not a good source of information. And the situation was so complex. The death rates are counted under the host of preventative measures, including the vaccine that have been put in place. And also, vaccination of children against COVID is, again, an instance of limiting the spread of the disease primarily to the population of the elderly. And you could argue that it doesn't stop the spread of the disease, but it does limit it quite substantially. And that's not nothing. But it's not an argument. People aren't very well aware that they are expressing a concern when they are themselves convinced that they're making an argument. And it takes a lot of skill to pick that apart and interact with it appropriately.
Out of that period of time, from December of 2020 to July of 2021, the VAERS database, which is the only database we have, there were 14,000 post-COVID vaccination deaths. So how, if you're looking at risk towards benefit, is injecting a child, upholding what we...
Let me just go back a few seconds to read through that. The website says submitting a report to VAERS does not mean that healthcare personnel or the vaccine caused or contributed to the death. VAERS reports are unverified.
At risk towards benefit is injecting a child, upholding what we call the Hippocratic Oath, right? We talk about the Hippocratic Oath and we extrapolate from that. One of the first things, it's not said in the Hippocratic Oath, but it's the first thing is to do no harm. Now, as a police officer, I took oath as well. Protect, serve, preserve life and property. In my line of work, there are times when I had to take a life to save one. I don't necessarily think that applies to you, doctor.
It does not.
Maybe you can give your viewpoint, whether maybe you're for or against, a court ordering the children to be injected with something that there is no harm to. But now we're seeing actual harm with the vaccine. They didn't die from the disease. They're dying from the vaccine.
Yes.
See the legitimate concern and worry in this man's eyes. And that is so hard. It's so hard. However, we have to be very careful with invoking the Hippocratic Oath because Hippocrates didn't have vaccines. He frankly probably never knew about the transmission of diseases. Sometimes vaccines are treatment, but in general, they're more than that. And in many more cases than we're willing to admit, they're not treatment, they're prevention, but not for the individual in question. Yeah, we're injecting children with substance that could harm them potentially. However, by a margin that is hugely blown out of proportion by anti-vaxxers. However, this is what we're doing. And there is no way around that. There is no other way around that unless we just allow people to die from preventable diseases. Preventable not at the level of the individual, but at the level of the population. And perhaps we didn't have a discussion about that socially, whether this is what we want to do. But the introduction of vaccines and frankly, a lot of industrial and scientific progress has been built on doing things that manifest only at the statistical level, at the level of the population, that we can then appreciate. And that has allowed the population of the planet to explode. So we've been doing that for 100+ years. The state is expecting you to do things that you may not want to do. This is how we're able to maintain 7 billion people on the planet and growing. We cannot roll that back. That would be the depopulation that the previous person was talking about. Rolling that back, that would be chaos. That would be absolute chaos. And you would not want that.
Yeah, so your point is very logical and you're very well researched, and I applaud that because most people will go off their feelings as opposed to looking at the data as you did. So I appreciate that. When you point out that there's been 69 deaths, you said?
Correct.
From the CDC data.
If we trust it.
If we trust it. And then there was 13,000, 14,000 deaths?
14,000 according to the VAERS database.
Are you familiar with how the VAERS database works?
I am.
Do you know who can report to the VAERS database?
It's a voluntary report system, so it's open. It's open, either to patients, medical providers,
loved ones, anyone.
So before they expand on that, I would wager that this person sees this as positive because this database now allows people who have been wronged by the system to report things that would otherwise be missed or suppressed by submitting data to this database. See, people who think along those lines, they really value personal agency of the so-called ordinary people. And we need to respect that. But this goes back again to, I'm speculating right now, but I suspect that this may be true of a lot of people because this is what has been observed. People with an libertarian outlook on politics and policy and personal freedom are more likely to hold conspiracy beliefs. There's the dark side to personal agency and taking that as a end-all be-all and the way that societies should be run. It's because personal choice and personal freedom, that only takes you so far. What we're doing now, largely as a global society, is retreating back to this first-hand experience and valuing that more and more over evidence, systematic evidence that may not be convincing because it doesn't touch your body. The evidence doesn't present to you in as convincing a way as, your own hand or a tree outside or your sick child. But we got to balance this. There's no way around that. You are not a free particle in a chamber of gas that doesn't collide with anything. The individual choices that you make have, when done at scale, unpredictable, emergent effects across society. And that's something we have to deal with. So going back to this VAERS database, there is a dark side of trusting people with the ability to individually report vaccination adverse side effects. Because it's very likely that this data is going to be very biased. And Dr. Mike's going to explain that. Okay, let's go.
During a heated political time, during which people are very angry and are reporting things that do happen during a pandemic, isn't it possible that there's people reporting things that after we look at it and judge it off of the VAERS system, that it is in fact not shown to be causative, but in fact a coincidence or a correlation?
So yes, I would say that correlation doesn't equal causation, but I'll give you another data point to chew on. When I was a law enforcement officer, I saw people that were dying, and then when they were assessing the cause of death, they had a range of other morbidities. And just because they died with COVID, they didn't die from COVID. But getting back to the children, none of them did.
I think the reason why 0 children died is because we immunized so many. A.
That is probably what's going on.
B, the fact that the court ordered you to do it, it's not really my place to judge. Because You have two parents that have two decision-making capacities, and someone has to make a decision. I don't know what's right. I leave that to people who are smarter than me. I can talk about the science of it all. And when we look at the science, yes, COVID is a low-risk proposition for children, but it's not a zero risk. When we look at the COVID vaccine, especially at the peak of that pandemic, when we were seeing hospitals overflooded, when we were
We didn't know. 1 year in, we already knew, and that was when the vaccine was in some phase of clinical trials already. We didn't know the effect of long COVID on children. And we already knew that long COVID was a thing. That's one thing. Possibility of harm to children. However, I don't know if he's going to raise that, but there's also unfortunate reality that children can be massive spreaders of disease. That's a fact. I mean, anyone who's a parent or knows one knows that this is the case.
Losing people left and right, that was our sole way out of that pandemic. So the fact that 0 children died with the vaccination rate that we had, I suspect that the vaccine played a major role in making that happen.
All right, I'm sorry. We're out of time.
I'd love to go.
Okay, I think that's enough for part 1. So that was anti-vaccine lies cost lives. I would agree. I mean, he's doing a really good job. One thing I'd say is that, and he said that in another video, that he was trying very hard not to say anything that was untrue. Sometimes explains himself a lot and adds a bunch of qualifiers. And that's fair. He's a healthcare professional. So this is his responsibility towards the public, that he represents his profession and the healthcare system with as much integrity as he can. However, I think more people need to be educated about vaccines and that's one thing, about science, but also about how, in general, conspiracy thinking works. Because what we've seen here is a couple of people who are usually very concerned about their own bodily autonomy or their children's bodily autonomy or their children's welfare and their health, or have suffered a loss. We're dealing with legitimate concerns that are very proximal and very powerful, because this is something that they feel that is happening either directly to them, or that they feel that it's happening to their family, or they perceive a threat that is emerging in their direct environment. And it's very hard to counter that. And I'll say that again. I said it at the beginning. It's not a good strategy to try to fight fire with fire and threaten people as a way of convincing them to get vaccinated. But coming back to what I have to say, so he's a healthcare professional, but more people need to be educated about the science. I think people who are interested in that are doing a good job, but we're not discussing enough how to approach the people that we're debating, because we tend to, I think the scientific community can sometimes speak in a very disparaging way about anti-vaxxers. And some of those agents in that community can be quite toxic. And I think that they're doing that for nefarious reasons, as a form of narcissistic supply or whatnot. But they recruit a lot of people based on legitimate concern. And we need to know how this works, because without that, we're just going to engage with those people at a surface level, at a level of debating their argument or arguing or trying to dismantle what they said without trying to look at the concern that they're expressing and addressing that, trying to relate. And instead, we're just calling them stupid. And I think that's doing, this is actually achieving the opposite. So, yep, that was part 1 of Dr. Mike versus 20 anti-vaxxers on Surrounded on Jubilee. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again.